this is really part of what we have to do. We have to talk. We have to have, have a discussion, because it is really, I think, in my view, associations for community living and the agencies that provide supports across this province, of which there's about 380, can't do it alone. And that actually by doing it alone, it maybe doesn't even help. And it's, it's like my colleagues have said, it really does start early. We need to think about our young people. We need to think about employment programs. The good news, the very good news is that within the Ministry of Community and Social Services, working with our partners in Ministry of Colleges, Training and Universities, are working on what's called a supportive employment program. It really is, how do we offer supportive employment for all people with disabilities in the province of Ontario, because we do know that people do need some additional supports, sometimes additional time, sometimes some additional supports, sometimes some additional supports actually in the job, or somebody that's available for them to help them. And we know that in other jurisdictions that's been able to happen through initiatives like Employment First. So we've really taken that position, and I think our work around employment programs is exciting. Also working to support young people and getting into employment, and I think that's the same with all of our young people. We know that young people who get into jobs early, whether it's in high school, that they actually do engage. So it's no different for people with disabilities. We've moved in the province. We moved to away. We're trying to move away from a sheltered workshop environment. That doesn't mean, though, that sheltered workshops are going to close immediately. It is one person at a time. It's thinking about all the alternatives. You saw that in the film. The woman who was struggling with how do I make this a competitive job that involves more people. So it will take time, and we will struggle with this. Agencies will struggle with it. Many agencies have struggled with it and are making the transition. But we're not closing. We're on sheltered workshops. That's not the intent, but the intent is to try to move away from sheltered workshops to more community involvement. Really is around well-being, engagement, and expression. And the folks in the film said it all. What did they really want? They wanted to be involved in their community. They wanted to have friends. They wanted to have relationships. They wanted to be involved in sports activities, recreation activities, and that really is about us all taking that on as a community. So it's not just about some folks, it's about employers, it's about all of us, and thinking about the lifelong dreams that we all have, and that people with developmental disabilities have as well. So that's the journey that we're on. It's been a long journey in this province, and it's exciting that people are coming out and thinking about it, and we certainly look forward to working with our partners across the province and communities to make that change. So again, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Karen. Now, Deepak.
Thank you very much for having us. Thanks to CLP for organizing this. As my colleagues, it's a tough act to follow after such a powerful movie. Clearly, we all understand that there's significant challenges and barriers to getting folks employed. Corbrook has been in the business of providing employment or helping people find employment for over 65 years. We have been running a sheltered workshop for about as long as we've been in existence. And we have made the decision in working with our ministry partners to slowly transition away from that, because as I said to the minister, ethically we agree with the decision to have no more admissions into sheltered workshops, but practically it's very challenging. And it has been very challenging, and it's been quite a journey for Corbrook. And I've been, I want to say that Karen and her team have been really supportive because we've had a number of town halls with families, and there's been a lot of concern around what's going to happen once the shelter workshop comes to an end. But what is really interesting is the more you talk to people, the more you realize that how much information they don't really have as to what's really out there. So what we've learned through the process of our transitioning is that once you educate and make people aware as to the opportunities that exist, people are willing to work with you and move on. So that's been our experience. We have a concerted strategy at corporate. We support about 165 people in our, 100 people in our workshop. We support over 600 other people in employment-based activities. And our goal has been to really focus on individuals to see, what they're looking for. So it's really person-directed, and we are providing opportunities for people to be able to access other services and opportunities within their communities. But one thing that we've sort of experienced from our in running a lot of the employment programs is that a lot of folks may feel that they're ready for employment, but that they're not truly job ready. And so we've been doing a lot of work, and we've been successful in helping folks really get the training that they require to become job ready. And it's interesting to see how many people really feel that they're able to get a job, but truly understand that maybe it'll take me some time and maybe I need to go through some employment preparation. And we run a number of programs that have been very successful in really moving people along. Finally, I think just to comment on the movie, we sort of see this all the time. I think as much as we want to get involved with our young folks, I completely agree, Bob, I think it's also awareness with their employers, and we've been working very hard to really change that focus. I think the US is way ahead in terms of their understanding and wanting to adopt and change. So I think in Toronto or Ontario, Canada in general, I think it's more challenging, and I know there's a need out there. We're facing an aging labor force, and there's a need to grow and look at other alternatives for employment. But I still think there's a lot of work to be done in terms of raising the awareness. And I think the best way you're able to do this is what they showed in terms of the work trials, because I think that speaks for themselves. I think a lot of times employers are not willing to take on somebody because, again, they have their biases. I think once you demonstrate, and the individual demonstrates themselves as to what they can really do, I think you're able to break down those barriers. So once again, thanks for having me here.
The whole concept of employment first, and I think that what we're seeing is that in other jurisdictions around the world, not just in our own, but in Australia, in the United States, that we're starting to see shelter workshops starting to phase out in all of these other jurisdictions, United Kingdom. And when our workshops were set up initially, I think they were set up for the right reasons, and initially the thought was that they would be good training centers and that people could eventually transition from those training centers into jobs in the community. But what we've seen happen over time is that reality really hasn't taken place. In fact, there are studies that show that it's usually about 1 to 5% of people have ever transitioned from those sheltered workshops into paid employment. So I think that not only do we have to work hard to really assist people who want to work, to provide them with tools and the supports to get there that are currently working in sheltered work environments, but we also have to really focus on this whole concept of employment first, which means that we need to provide people with the opportunity to try employment as a first option before someone may consider going to another type of segregated kind of programming. And that's really something that I think a whole community plays a role in, from the school system to parents to people that have a disability themselves to the business community to our municipalities. Everybody plays a role in that happening. There are, in Canada, I want to say that there's a report that came out from the Canadian Association of Community Living that stated that only 26.1% of people with an intellectual disability in Canada have some form of paid competitive employment. We do know that there are other locales, like Washington State, where it's 87% of people who have an intellectual disability have some form of paid competitive employment. But one thing that we know is that we have to start working with young people early, and we have to get young people involved with employment, with jobs at a very young age, There's a study that came out of the United States in 2013 that said the most important indicator of future workforce attachment is whether a young person had a job while they were in school. So we know that that's something that we really need to focus on, and it can happen. In Sarnia, people that have an intellectual disability, we did a one-time snapshot study of people in our community. Granted, it's a smaller community, we're only 126,000 in our county, but we're able to see that 80% of people that came through that model of employment first and getting summer jobs ended up 5 years later, they were still in paid competitive employment. So I know it can be done, and it can be done a lot better than that. But I think that we're on the cusp of something big right now. We're seeing that employers in the business community are really starting to embrace people with disabilities. I think I better stop there, or the big hook's going to come out.
I should say we work with many wonderful employers who provide great opportunities for individuals. It's meaningful work, they're engaged, and they're well treated. But there are also jobs out there that don't pay so well, where you're not treated so well, and we do worry about people being victimized, and we've seen that. So that's something that we keep an eye to. The other piece is that I think as we move towards this as government, as agencies providing support and encouraging people to have support, that there's got to be an economic impact for that. We can't just rely on the benevolence of organizations and companies to support people and provide jobs for individuals. There's got to be productivity, and if the standard becomes minimum wage, that's great. But there's an expectation of productivity that goes along with the minimum wage that people need to be able to achieve. We are looking at ways to support people that aren't able to meet that level of productivity, but still would need a level of income. So if ODSP rates are you're living at the rate of about 50% of the poverty line in Toronto, and for legal reasons and other reasons, human rights claims and such, you can't get a job that goes beyond, that pays less than minimum wage.
Julie is our expert who actually was employed in a sheltered workshop and now, as I mentioned earlier, is a barista. Would you like to tell us a little bit about your story, Julie? Need to hold the mic.
Working coffee shop and jerkies and 11 years. Yes. Doing the banking and shopping and everything.
Pearl, would you like to tell us a little bit about what Julie's work in the community is like?
When she worked, one of the things that Julie said on her resume was she likes working where she's at the historic place more than the workshop. The experience that she's gotten there, she feels more independent there and more contributing than in the workshop. And even though in the beginning she liked the workshop, she feels a lot better working at Surrey Place. And she was also working at the University of Toronto too, before they closed. And even though she didn't like it as much as Surrey Place, she liked working at Surrey Place. So she enjoys it. She interacts with people, and actually her boss, who she goes with her boss sometimes twice a week to another place, they look after the banking and stuff like this. So she has gained a lot more experience there than being working in the workshop.
Great.
And this has boosted her up.
Great. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us, Julie, about your job? Your favorite part? No. I think I've actually bought coffee from Julie at the coffee shed before. She does a great job. All right, well, thank you very much to all the panelists for telling us, giving us your thoughts on the films and telling us a little bit about the work that you do.
You all spoke about transition, and other countries being further ahead in this transition. So I was wondering, is there a time frame for when this transition will be complete, and is there, I guess, something or that people in the community, such as myself, can do to help with the transition?
I think, so we know from the ministry that there hasn't been a clear direction as to when it's going to happen, when the workshop's going to shut down. I think most agencies are working, it's on an agency by agency basis. But so for corporate, we are hoping to slowly transition by the end of the fiscal year. And what that means for us is that we're working individually with every person who's in the workshop to come up with opportunities within the sector, whether it be recreational, life skills, employment, whatever they're looking for. We're trying to offer those services to individuals. So that's our self-imposed deadline. I'm not sure if we're going to be successful in achieving it. In terms of what people in the community can do to help, I think if you're an employer, open the doors, raising awareness around the impact, regarding the value folks with disabilities bring to the workforce, diversity that it creates. I think those are some of the key things that I would really encourage people to do and speak on our behalf.
So it is true, we haven't put a time frame on, and that's really on purpose, because it's two things. It's first and foremost one person at a time when the agencies, and it's going to be one agency and one community at a time. And so, different agencies and different communities and different cultures across the province are just at different stages, and different opportunities around employment. So the minister thought it was really important for us not to put a time frame on, but to encourage agencies working with their families to actually think about it, and working with employment programs, and also recognizing that we have some work to do around employment programs for people with disabilities. So putting all of those elements together, there is not a time frame. And I think what can communities do, it really is around that awareness, because I think, and I have to admit, myself, you think, before I came into this job years ago, and recognizing that sheltered workshops, they played a place in history, and they always will. And an important step, a really important step in history, when you think about moving from institutions, right? So they were really, really, really important, and they really are attached to many folks. But to really help folks understand that maybe isn't the best way for people to be included, and it may not meet their hopes and wishes and dreams around being a part of a community, and that it's important that people at bare minimum make a minimum wage. That's really a part of it, and that by being out there in the community, that really is what gets people independence and inclusion, and really allows us all to move forward. So that's, I think it is communities, it is employers, it's us all changing that, all of us, and I put me in that category as well as a person. It's about changing.
Thank you. Anyone else want to say anything to that question?
I was just going to say that we touched on employers, Deepak did, and I think that in order to get employers to open the door, there's an education process, and I think it's something that we as communities really need to work on. There's a lot of data out there that talks about the fact that people with a disability actually are a lot better employees when it comes to loyalty, when it comes to taking less sick days, when it comes to things like employee morale, when it comes to having less accidents on the job, and the list goes on. So I think that the smart employers that have opened the doors are already starting to realize that there's a huge return on investment of hiring people with a disability. And I think that, that's where it starts, that when you start with a few employers, then it grows, because then you can work on creating employer champions. And there are many employer champions out there. I'm so fortunate to be from Sarnia. Many of you know Mayor Mike Bradley from Sarnia, and his challenge to other mayors across not just Ontario now, but Canada, to hire people with a disability. 2 weeks ago, he was in Newfoundland. A number of mayors took up the challenge there. Last week, he was in Alberta. A number of mayors took up the challenge there. And we've been very fortunate that we've been able to see that some of these employers that, you know, in a lot of it, there is a role to be played by service providers, because we need to make sure job match and job fit is everything. When we're assisting people with their career pathing to understand where their aptitudes are and their skills and abilities and desires, how those could turn into employment, it's really critical to make sure that we make good job matches. If we do that, those employers will come back to the hiring well again and again and again. I have employers that we work with in Sarnia, Walmart, Home Depot, Lowe's, Tim Hortons, that have hired continuously. We can't give them enough people. Tim Hortons has hired 15 people from us in the last 2 years. Can't give them enough people.
Thank you very much, Paul. I'm going to cut you off.
Sorry.
But you know,
It's really great stuff. Does anybody else on the panel want to say anything?
I was just gonna say, they've done a really great job in Sarnia, and it is about that community leadership, and you can see where it makes a huge difference.
I hear a big challenge to Toronto being thrown
Yeah,
out there.
yeah.
Mayor Tory, come on now.
Wondering, I was really struck by the economic situation in Toledo, and that if you're going to provide these opportunities, I wonder what you think about people with developmental disabilities taking jobs for the work experience at less than minimum wage or even volunteer experiences. How do you feel about that notion?
If I could go first, I think it's a terrible idea. People that have a disability should never work for less than minimum wage. That's why they call it a minimum wage. It just doesn't make sense. I think it devalues people. I think that we're setting employers up for legal issues, whether it's through employment standards or health and safety legislation if there's an accident where they could be sued. And it just really also says, it also even impacts the supports and how people are accepted in the workplace. We do find that employers, when they hire somebody and they treat that employee like they would anybody else off the floor, when they hire that person, they usually put a lot more of their own resources into ensuring that the person is profitable as quickly as possible, like the rest of their employees. So it's definitely a very bad idea to do that.
So I'm not going to disagree with my colleague. Having said that, I do think when you're getting into the workforce, and certain fields do this more than others, there's a time where you're an intern, there's a time where you're receiving training, and that sometimes leads to employment. Media is notorious for this, working for numbers of years for less than minimum wage or for the coffee money, basically. So I think we should, I worry about us getting too entrenched of there's no value in working unless it's a minimum wage job. And I think we need to continue that discussion. I'm also aware that there are some folks that we support who are well-intentioned, and when I talked earlier about a certain level of productivity, minimum wage in Ontario is at 11 something and is moving up to $14. There's an expectation that you're able to produce $14 an hour's worth of output. For some folks that might be a struggle, and I don't want them to lose out on. I think we need to continue that discussion of how we address people that can't meet that level of productivity without just simply relying on people's benevolence or an assumption that their needs are met through other sources such as ODSP or family, whatever it might be.
It's a great question. I think we battle with that all the time. So we have a pretty large employment program at Corbrook. Last year we supported 50 individuals find employment, on minimum wage or higher. So there's opportunities. Like I said, I think earlier on, the issue sometimes is giving someone a chance so that the employer can actually see what skills the person is bringing on, because there are biases and there's always those challenges. So as much as we've tried to avoid in providing quote unquote free labor, we work with our coaches and the individual, whether it be for 4 hours in a week, to really help with some of those tasks and see what the employer feels after that. And a lot of times that leads to employment. If once that threshold isn't met, then that coaching stops.
Yeah, maybe just to add a little bit. the goal would be that people who are working are making a minimum wage. That being said, I think, and I talked about employment supports, I think it's really important that we get in place the right employment supports. So I was able to visit Walgreens in the US who have, their distribution center has 30% of individuals with disabilities at the bare minimum on the workforce. So the big difference that they found was it might take someone without a disability a few weeks to get trained, but it took someone with a developmental disability or broader disabilities as well about 2 years. So, you know, recognizing that those employment supports need to be in place probably for a longer period of time, and also they recognize that there was ups and downs, and this would be true for all people with disabilities, that we would see that sometimes they need some additional supports at periods of time, so there needs to be somebody to reach out to for those additional supports. And one other point they found in, this was in Algoma, so this was in Ontario, where they've moved away, and they found a lot of their individuals that they were supporting that had been in the shelter workshop were actually older. So they found that many of those individuals want to go into meaningful volunteer work, but real volunteer work, not volunteering where a paid job, but volunteering, you know, at the hospital, or volunteering in all of those kinds of environments where we would all volunteer, and that was very successful. I think that they think that has had a lot to do with their age cohort of folks that were in the sheltered workshop. Some people did get jobs for sure, and that worked out really well. But the real meaningful volunteerism seemed to work for some folks as well.
Great.
I'm just wondering, with the situation, the unfortunate situation with places like LOTT, if there's any lesson you think can be taken away from the way things have worked out.
Sure. I think we as community service agencies need to do what we do best, which is not operating businesses in our case. We provide support for people, help them find employment. We employ people with disabilities ourselves. We need to be leaders in that area. We've had experiments where you try and run a business on behalf of, it's not in our wheelhouses. Much better to rely on the community. So to me, that was sort of, watching that sort of play out, you could sort of get the sense they did not have the capacity, the capital, the organizational structure to set up and run a competing business. I think that's a lesson that we've taken. And we consider this, and as the province announced that sheltered workshops would phase out, there was the question internally, well, do we try and take this on ourselves? And very quickly we got to, that's not what we do, that's not what we should be doing, we're going to move away from that.
In our case, it's an interesting question because, so I've been executive director for 6 years at Corbrook. When I took over, our sales from our contracts were depleting. I mean, we were bleeding to about, from, I think in the heyday 10, 15 years ago, from $1 million annually to about $125,000 annually. So we were in a similar position. They're expensive programs to run. We know that. I mean, this is a constant issue, right? So a lot of the dollars that were coming through the funding were going to run a losing operation. But we, as an organization, really looked at the model, and fortunately, we hired some great people to really turn that around for us. So today, we have a pretty strong social enterprise, a business, and I'll say it here. It's we have a trail mix business that's sold across Canada through TJ Maxx, Marshalls and Winners, HomeSense. We also have spices that are produced at Corbrook and sold across Canada. And that really turned our business around to where it's growing. So our board and the organization was sort of wondering what to do once the workshops came to an end. And so our goal has been to see how we can transition that into a for-profit business that will be part of the related business of the organization, The difference being that folks that are working there currently that are not being paid minimum wage will be paid minimum wage as long as they do the job, right? I mean, that's the key piece here. So the organization obviously, uses the dollars that are going to be coming from this to be able to compensate, to add and provide additional services that we will not be able to with the funding that we currently have.
I just want to mention something too, because Deepak brought up social enterprise, and first of all, hats off for the direction that your agency's moving in. But I think there's also a bit of a caution with social enterprise, because one of the things that I've noticed in traveling around Ontario and talking to some of the different agencies, there are a number of developmental service agencies in Ontario that over the last 3-4 years have been trying to figure out how they're going to make the transition, and have set up social enterprises and some small little businesses, and in thinking that by doing this that they might eventually be paying minimum wage, and we're not seeing a whole lot of evidence of that. As well, a lot of them aren't terribly inclusive. And a number of the agencies that I've talked to, although they were very well intentioned when they first set up these businesses, things like stores and restaurants and farms and such like that, that people would be gaining skills that they could then use to transition into a community job. But what some of them have been finding, the majority that I've talked to, is that people are now they're not moving out of these enterprises that originally were set up for the right reason to move people out. So I just think that there's a bit of a cautionary tale there.
Absolutely, and just to add to that, we completely agree. I think the difference though for us is that the enterprise is not about skill building anymore, it's about revenue generation for the organization, right? So I think that goal was through the workshops, was to really build those skills and develop and ultimately lead into the community, which never really happened. The goal for us is that we know that the business is operating well. We have business people that have been hired to really develop the business and provide the numbers that we need to be able to make it successful. So absolutely, Bob, I concur, but I think for us, the goal is that those jobs there are jobs for people, and hopefully leads to other careers within the organization within those areas.
No, I mean I agree. We've all sort of said that it's a fascinating time and an interesting time as things transition away from sheltered work into more meaningful, gainful employment. We're all supportive of that, and I think, and I've really appreciated sort of the approach the ministry has taken on this. At first, it's very gradual and thoughtful, and I think that's helped alleviate some fear that people might have around what's coming next. So we're happy to be part of that.
Can I? No, I found this very interesting today because this lady here, she moved from the shelter workshop into the community and has been successful and is very good. And many of our guys, as I was looking at this film, many have talents. And you got to bring them out from where they were to where they should be in the right niche. And you will see things coming out of them. You thought, wow, I didn't know you had that in you. Yes, give them a chance. That's what it's about. Give them a chance.
Thank you. Thank you.